Hi guys, we're back with another video. This one's going to be about the US as well. This one's going to really relate to transiting Mars and how it could indicate events related to the war in Russia. Also events related to like kind of underhanded deception, underhanded aggressive tactics, which may all kind of stem or be sourced from the US. It could also relate to some sort of economic developments, possibly some sort of deception or deceptive actions, I guess, in general. That's probably like the umbrella term or umbrella phrase to describe what it looks like is going to happen. Some sort of underhanded action, underhanded deception, underhanded aggression that is difficult to pinpoint at first. So I guess the general recommendation would be not to trust everything you see that may occur during the periods of time that are discussed in this video. So let's just get into it. So this is actually the natal chart of the United States. So if you looked at July 4th of 1776, like the day of freedom, etc., independence, this is the chart that you would see. So like this is where the planets were during that time. And you can notice here that I have in red, there is a square in the natal chart of the United States, so the birth chart of the United States, and the square is outlined by this giant red line here, and it's between Mars, the planet of war and action and aggression, impulse, squaring Neptune, which is the planet of deception, distortion, the unseen, what is hidden, things that aren't what they seem to be on the outside. Also, Neptune rules over like the whole savior victim type mentality thing. And I do feel like this square kind of is very symbolic of the US's proclivity for starting wars with like this guise of going over to some foreign country and like just acting like we're there to save everybody, when I think that everybody knows at this point that we're not really there to save anybody. We're just there probably for the resources. But that's just my opinion. I'm not trying to I'm just saying that we kind of have a bad reputation for that, especially if you like leave the US and you go and talk to some like other people in foreign countries. We definitely have a terrible reputation for that, and I think it's well earned. So all I'm trying to say is that, I think that's what this square represents, is that like we have a tendency to go to other countries, overseas, which is what is actually related to Neptune as well, as countries overseas, and start wars, which is Mars. So like kind of like underhanded actions, deceptive action, aggression taken with the excuse that we're there to save people, like the whole savior victim thing, which is Neptune. And I think that this square just kind of really represents the deception there. It's also interesting that you can see here that we have a semi-square, which is a 45-degree angle, almost exact, to the north node. This is the north node, and the north node represents destiny, as well as like the path towards growth and things like that, and kind of like what your, I guess, destiny is in this life. But in the chart of like a nation, I feel like it kind of does this, the fact that we have like the north node forming a semi-square to Mars and then a semi-square to Neptune, and a semi-square is an aspect of like frustration. I feel like this configuration is just kind of very like appropriate for the US and like what we've become known for, which is kind of also like a north node thing. Like it's kind of ended up overshadowing our destiny. Like this square, like our tendency to just like go and start wars in foreign countries is kind of over the top. So yeah, I just find this very interesting, and it does relate to this video. So just keep that in mind. Right now, aside from the US's chart, this is still the US's chart, it's just I have different things on it now. And you can see that in green on the outside, we have the transiting planets. So these are the natal planets of the US. These don't change. This is the birth chart, you know what I mean, for that day. But then outside, we have the green planets, which are the transiting influences, which means that like right now, if you looked up where transiting Mars is, it's at like 25 degrees of Gemini right now. But on this chart for October 4th of 2022, transiting Mars is at like 21 degrees of Gemini. So anyways, that's what the green planets signify. That's where they are in the sky. So you can see here that we have natal Neptune of the US The US's natal Neptune is at 22 degrees of Virgo. And we also happen to have transiting Neptune itself opposing natal Neptune, like exact during this whole year. So this has been happening since I think last year in 2021 actually. But we're getting like the last turn of it this winter, which is really important. But anyways, the point is that transiting Neptune has been opposing our natal Neptune, and I think that's why we've had a lot of like confusion as far as like everybody's trying to see through the veil, you know what I mean? There was a period of time like throughout like 2021 when everybody was just mega confused about like what was true and what was false and who was real and who was fake. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the news you get, a lot of the conspiracy theories and stuff like that, you just have a hard time discerning now who's really on your side. I feel like it's the same thing with a lot of the figures that are coming out now. You know, I feel like you just have no way of knowing who's really, you know, who's been made to be some sort of like a hero in the eyes of certain groups of people and who isn't really a hero, I guess. But the point is that, you know, I think the increase in deception and the increase in confusion overall across the country is really very well symbolized by this Neptune opposite Neptune thing. Because oppositions are tense aspects, as you could probably guess from it being called an opposition. And it's the two planets of deception, or the same planet of deception, but just the transiting planet aspecting the natal planet. So just heightening the deception overall and the confusion about deception and confusion about what direction the deception is coming from, or who it's coming from. So anyways, Neptune moves very slowly as well. It's one of the slowest moving celestial bodies that we use in astrology. At least in this astrology, I don't go into like too many asteroids or like anything else in this. I'm just focusing on these main things, these main modern planets. So anyways, I digress. The point of this is to say that, as you can see, we have transiting Mars right over here at like 21 degrees of Gemini, and it's squaring transiting Neptune. And transiting Neptune is opposite the natal Neptune of the US. That's mostly what this slide is talking about, how transiting Neptune, which is over here, is opposite the natal Neptune of the US. And the last time that that's really happening is going to be this fall. And it's going to be more important this fall than it has been for the previous year or two, because of what we'll discuss in this video. So you can see that both this is transiting Neptune, and natal Neptune are actually square the natal Mars right here. So we have natal Neptune at 22 degrees of Virgo, natal Mars at 21 degrees of Virgo. They're about 90 degrees apart. Then natal Mars at 21 degrees of Virgo is about 90 degrees away from transiting Neptune here, which is at like 23 degrees of Pisces. But it moves backwards. It continues to move backwards as we go deeper into the winter. And then you can also see that transiting Mars is actually conjunct natal Mars. And this was exact on October 4th of 2022. So that was the first time that transiting Mars conjuncted natal Mars. And then you can also see that transiting Mars, which is this green one, is squaring both sides of this opposition of Neptune's, creating a T-square, which is this big red triangle thing on the screen. So that's creating like kind of a interesting dynamic here, because you have transiting Mars emphasizing the natal Mars. So there's a lot of like aggression. You know, in the US, you'll see, I guess, a heightened, because it's not often that you have transiting Mars going over your own, you know, natal Mars. That heightens your aggressive tendencies. So as a country, we could see more aggression. But in this case, we're going to see Mars transiting over our natal Mars. Then it's going to go retrograde over it again. And then it's going to go forward over it again. So we're having transiting Mars really emphasizing the natal Mars of the United States. So there's going to be some sort of aggression. Then at the same time, we have transiting Neptune really emphasizing our own natal Neptune, which represents deception and everything. So I'm just trying to say this is a very interesting dynamic. You have a lot of emphasis being brought to like a whole, to Mars and Neptune and the US's natal chart. And you can see another thing that I just want to point out here really quick is that the reason I pointed this out in the beginning, this square between Mars and Neptune, is because as you can see in the sky, we have transiting Mars squaring transiting Neptune at the same time. So like, so this is the natal chart, right? And then these are the transiting influences, which really have nothing to do with the natal chart. It just so happens, by like happenstance, that we're going to have transiting Mars squaring natal Neptune in the sky. The first time it happened was around October 4th, October 8th. But then, like, it's going to happen 2 more times. And I just find it really odd that each time that this happens, it's going to interact with the natal chart of the United States on 2 points. So we're basically going to have, like, the natal aspect that's going to be hit or triggered in the chart of the United States by these transiting influences is going to be its natal square between Mars and Neptune. But also the transiting influences themselves are actually going to be forming their own square between Mars and Neptune, which are going to exactly overlap with our own Mars-Neptune square. So it's a very Mars square Neptune sort of a time. Like, that's really, like, what I'm trying to point out here is that, like, this is like a layered system here where you're seeing that our natal aspect is really heavily being emphasized by the transiting influences, because not only do we have this square happening in the sky, but it happens to actually exactly overlap with our own square, right? And it doesn't just happen once, it happens 3 times because Mars goes retrograde and Neptune remains at about 22 degrees of Pisces during this period of time. So it's I don't know, you know, it's hard to say exactly what will happen, but that's what we're going to be discussing in this video. I'm just trying to, like, kind of bring the point home that this is really rare, and it does seem to really emphasize this in the US's chart, because this is a characteristic of, specifically, you know, it's unique to the US's chart because we're the ones that have this square. So I just find it really odd that we have this square and it exactly overlaps, and Mars is going to go and, you know, create it 3 different times. So I think that whatever problems we'll be facing will really have to do with the US's tendency to act in underhanded ways or take underhanded action, you know, start deceptive wars that aren't really for the purposes that they act like they're for, as well as just do things behind the scenes. I think that that's what's kind of being highlighted here. So yeah, the first time that Mars actually conjuncts natal Mars is on October 4th. Then the first time that Mars squares, so the first time that Mars reaches 22 degrees and it squares transiting Neptune, natal Neptune and then transiting Neptune, is October 8th of 2022. And then transiting Mars goes retrograde at 25 degrees of Gemini. So this is where it stations, like it stops, and it starts going backwards. And you can see it based off of this little R here, right? That is retrograde. And that happens around October 30th, October 31st. Then when it's stationed at 25 degrees, so like this is the point, this is the same date where it's like gone retrograde, October 31st. It's actually going to be squaring the progressed Neptune of the United States as well, which I find very interesting because that just kind of repeats the whole, you know, Mars square Neptune theme that seems to be coming up a lot here. So it's interesting that Mars is going to pass by that 22 degrees 3 different times, you know, where it's able to form this square that we talked about here with natal Neptune. And then it's going to emphasize the 25th degree of Gemini, where it forms an exact square between the progressed Neptune, you know, with the progressed Neptune at 25 degrees. So I just find that really interesting because whenever a planet goes retrograde, you have to watch what degree it goes retrograde at, because that degree is being emphasized. It's more important. It's going to be more sensitive in future as well. So to me, this just kind of really emphasizes how transiting Mars is going to be playing into the chart of the United States, specifically with reference to the US's natal square between Mars and Neptune. And that's just like what I think as far as like Mars going retrograde at 25 degrees, just as it's squaring the progressed Neptune as well. And that happens on, October 31st. Then Mars will remain at 25 degrees of Gemini because it's going to stop and then go backwards, so it's going to take a while to start really moving backwards. It'll remain at 25 degrees from October 21st to November 8th. Then the second time that Mars reaches 22 degrees, where it's basically squaring natal Neptune and squaring transiting Neptune, is going to be exact on November 19th of 2022. So that's the second time that Mars squares Neptune, both Neptunes. And that'll last overall from November 15th to November 23rd. But that's something to keep in mind. And then right after that, it's going to move back another degree where it reaches 21 degrees of Gemini. And that's when transiting Mars is going to conjunct the natal Mars of the US again. And that'll be on November 23rd of 2022. Then after that, transiting Neptune stations direct. Okay, so this is also part of why this is important. Because the first time when Mars first initially went up to 22 degrees, back on like October 8th of 2022, you may have noticed that transiting Neptune wasn't exactly at 22 degrees of Pisces. But the second time when Mars goes retrograde and it hits this point of 22 degrees of Gemini again, when it does that, it's going to be around December 3rd of 2022. No, not December 3rd. It's going to be on November 19th of 2022. That's when Mars goes back to 22 degrees. And at that time, transiting Neptune is actually going to be at 22 degrees as well. So if you look over here, you see that Mars is at 22 degrees here. It's squaring natal Neptune exact at 22 degrees. Mars 22 degrees. Neptune, transiting Neptune, which is over here, is also at 22 degrees. So at this time, all three of these things are going to be at 22 degrees. And also at this time, around this time, shortly after this time, transiting Neptune is going to station at 22 degrees, and it's going to station direct. So to me, November 19th looks like a very interesting time because that's when we may see the height or the more important event that is like symbolized by this whole Neptune square Mars thing that's really being emphasized here. So it's possible that there could be events that really occur during this specific period of time. So if there was really a period of time that I would say like you should be careful, I guess, it would be around November 19th to like, around November 15th to November 23rd. So anyways, like I was saying, transiting Neptune will station direct at 22 degrees and 38 minutes of Pisces. So this is going to be like kind of the last time that it's exactly opposing our own natal Neptune. So this is definitely a period of time to watch. And this is going to happen on December 3rd of 2022. And then Neptune is actually going to remain at 22 degrees of Pisces, while it's stationing direct from November 23rd to December 15th of 2022. So during that whole period of time, there could be a lot of the confusion and, the psyops and everything that everybody kind of saw for the past couple of years. You can see even more of that during this time because this will be a very, whenever a planet stations like direct or retrograde and it's exactly aspecting something else like this natal Neptune, that's when you're going to see like the most dramatic expression of that particular aspect, usually. So that's a period of time to watch. Then transiting Mars is going to station direct at 8 degrees of Gemini. So transiting Mars is going to go back to here. Then it's going to turn direct, right? And it's actually going to turn direct while it's conjunct the natal Uranus, which is the planet of like disruption, unexpected events like explosions, technology, cryptocurrency, progressive movements, anarchy, innovation, computers, electricity, networks, etc. So that's also like kind of troublesome because like Mars is the planet of like action and like sudden, things like that, and then Uranus rules over like sudden events. So it's possible that we could see some like really sudden aggressive acts or sudden actions, like sudden destructive actions. Things like explosions and stuff like that would be represented possibly by something like this. So, there could be sudden events, sudden acts of aggression that could occur. Also, if you use the chart for the U.S. that has 4:50 p.m. as the like birth time of the U.S. for like when they actually signed the Declaration of Independence, then you would have a descendant that is also at 8 degrees. And the descendant actually rules over like adversaries, competitive, people you're in competition with, other countries, things like that. So this doesn't bode well, you know what I mean? But I mean, it really does depend on what time you're using. But generally speaking, besides the fact that this could potentially also be the descendant, the fact that transiting Mars is going to be going direct while it's on top of the US's natal Uranus isn't a great sign, just generally speaking. So be careful around January 12th of 2023. Also be careful generally from January 2nd to January 24th, because, you know, there could be like some sudden events that occur. So anyways, back to this square, because I do want to explain it in a second. You can see that transiting Mars then conjuncts the natal Mars again on March 6th of 2023. And then we get the final square between transiting Mars and transiting Neptune and natal Neptune. And that occurs exact on March 8th of 2023. And then finally, the final event there of this whole like Mars saga is that transiting Mars squares the progressed Neptune, and it finishes that off on March 16th of 2023, and then after that it'll move into Cancer. So just to discuss the sort of things that we could kind of expect during these periods of time, you know, Mars square Neptune really does kind of like I talked about before, it kind of is a very symbolic of like a tendency to go to war for reasons that aren't really real, you know what I mean, for deceptive like purposes, but to put like a happy like fantasy oriented face on it, you know what I mean, like a lie, like a hero story or whatever, that we're gonna go and save people, or like, you know, protect freedom, spread democracy, that sort of stuff. That's kind of the whole Mars Neptune vibe, because the square is a tense aspect. Mars is the planet of war, and Neptune is the planet of deception. You get my point. Other things that you could see at this time is there could potentially be weapons related to health, because Neptune actually relates to like illnesses, and there's actually an astrologer named Edwin Leonard who is on YouTube, and he predicted COVID before it even happened. And it's actually kind of freaky because he doesn't get that much credit for it, but he really did. And he talked about how Neptune can represent like illnesses that are difficult to trace and stuff like that. Mars is also the planet of sex, and the planet ruling over like I guess aggressive tactics, like you know what I mean, tools of war or whatever. And a major tool of war could also be like biological warfare, etc. Or like illnesses that are spread and things like that. And I know they're trying to kind of like bring in some hype related to like monkeypox and stuff right now. So it's possible that at this time they could kind of like ramp things up related to that throughout these next few months. But there could also be other events, like there could even be like false flags, or like just something related to like aggression, war, aggressive things that are deceptive in nature. Also, Mars is going to be going retrograde through Gemini, so it could also relate to like social media or papers, communication. There could be a lot of lies, you know what I mean? And it may be really hard at the time, like over these next few months, to really understand what exactly is real and what's fake. But, you know, it could be rough. Also wanted to say that there could be news related to COVID and the vaccines. Like there could be like things that come out at this time related to that as well, that was previously kept hidden, perhaps. So just wanted to put that out there. Also, yeah, like I said, Mars is going to be going retrograde through Gemini, and I discussed it in a video just now, but I'm just going to go through it really quick. So Gemini rules over like short distance transportation. It rules over things that you use to travel local distances, like cars, bikes, buses, subways, you know, anything, you know, even your feet. Like that's the area of Gemini. Also, Gemini rules over like communication. So it rules over things like social media. Also, you know, papers, the mail, communication, like messaging apps, things like that, your cell phone, so, you know, telephone lines, things like that. Anything that's used as a means to communicate ideas to somebody else. Also like radio stations, networks, things like that. Like sort of local communication, local networks, local systems that all interconnect is all going to be related to Gemini. and, you know, also railroads and things. So I talked about it in the other video, but I kind of have to wonder if perhaps Mars going retrograde in Gemini could represent some of the issues related to like, or some of the fears that there are related to oil, because actually at the same time that Mars is going retrograde, so Mars went retrograde at like 25 degrees of Gemini, which is while it's exactly in conjunct Pluto, and in conjunctions are aspects which represent like a disruption or a need for adjustment. So, you know, this is the planet of like action. It's going retrograde, so it's actions and its desire to go out and express itself or whatever. In this end of Gemini, which is like local areas, local transportation and stuff, is being disrupted in some way by Pluto, and Pluto rules over like oil and gas. Resources that are hidden under the ground fall under the rulership of Pluto. So it's interesting that, you know, transiting Mars was forming an exact inconjunct, or not an exact, but an almost exact inconjunction to transiting Pluto when it went retrograde. So it's possible that we could experience some issues related to the whole issue about like us going through the reserves of oil and gas. And that may be part of the problem, you know, part of the issue related to war and stuff. Also, or like, you know, the deceptive actions or deceptive warlike actions that are taken. And also like obviously the war in Ukraine, this could definitely indicate issues related to that, or issues that are created which supposedly relate to that. Yeah, also another thing is like Gemini rolls over like paper and documents and things like that, so it also rolls over like ballots, so it's possible that there could be some like deception related to communication or writing or like ballots, you know what I mean? Since we also happen to have like the whole election happening at this period of time, during this period of time. So, you know, it's possible that it could be publicized that there's deception related to communication. It's also possible that it may be really hard for the government to actually sort of like cover up their own like tendency to deceptively take action, or to cover up like actions that they've taken in order to fuel fires abroad, perhaps, you know, I don't know. But yeah, just worth noting that the election is actually around November 10th, and that's when we have like all of this stuff happening. We're also going to have a yod during that time as well, and I discussed that in the other video as well. But if there are issues related to like petroleum or like oil and gas, it's possible that it could actually start to come out around November like 11th leading through like November 18th. Because at that time, that's when we're going to have all these planets in Scorpio sextiling Pluto, and then forming another in conjunction to Mars, which overall will form like a yod here, which could indicate some sort of like a sudden unexpected event that causes a disruption. But basically, while Mars is going retrograde through Gemini, you could experience like a lot of issues related to local distance transportation, local shipping, domestic shipping, you know, things like that may relate to the issues with oil, or it could relate to other things. But yeah, you should be careful of like accidents on the roads and things like that. Also, like I said, Gemini rules over social media, and there could be a lot of, I feel like right now there's a definite issue related to like wars on free speech, wars related to what you can say and not say. There was recently like the whole issue with Elon buying Twitter and how he's like firing everybody. That's kind of a very Mars going retrograde in Gemini thing. There's going to be a concentration of like warlike energy, you know, tension and disruption and fights related to communication, and things like that. Also PayPal, basically trying to fine everybody like however many thousands of dollars it is for like just not having the right opinions. You know, like things like that. You may see more aggressive actions taken which relate to communication of ideas at this time. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So mostly the periods of time to really be like aware of would be every time that Mars goes over this natal Mars, and every time it squares these 2 points here. So it's mostly going to be around October 8th, which we've already passed, and then around November 19th, especially around that period of time, from like November 15th to 23rd. And that's also November 23rd is also when Mars conjuncts natal Mars. So November 19th to November 23rd. Then also around December. So from November 23rd to December 15th. So basically, because that's when Neptune is going to exactly oppose Neptune. So that's when deception is going to be like at its height, I guess. And then again, around March of 2023, that may be when things start to like be solved, I guess, or we get kind of a resolution to whatever issues are brought up throughout November and December. So I guess generally try to, I guess, be cautious from November 19th, especially around that period of time to like December 15th. Yeah. And then again in like March of 2023. So during those periods of time, we could see a lot of issues related to like I said, deceptive actions, not really knowing what's real, what's fake, psyops, etc. But also perhaps the U.S. having difficulty covering up its, deceptive actions or desires, I guess, in the outer world. So yeah, that is the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And yeah, see you guys for the next one. Have a great day.